do have
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming out, and I really want to thank you, Ken, for coming out. This is going to be a great time. So,
first of all, it was a mistake to give me a swivel chair, but I'll try not to do complete turns. I'm a high energy person. I actually have a standing desk, and I pace when I'm on the phone, so I'll do my best to try not to do this a lot, but bear with me if I do. But I do want to say, whoops, I don't want to do that. I want to say thank you to a lot of people. First of all, this guy next to me, Jeremy, is really influential in helping on the book, and I don't want to make him have a big head, but from the earliest days of writing some of the marketing chapter in particular, he took a look at that. I wound up actually then interviewing him in the book, and he wound up becoming a formal tech reviewer of it, and really helped also with the launch of the book. We got it actually to be #1 on Amazon for mobile when it came out. So it was a really great launch. It's been fun, and he's been a big help. Josh, who's I got your name right, Josh? Josh, yeah. There's like Jasons and Joshes and just lots of different people here at Skookum. But Josh was really awesome in doing a lot of the organizing behind the scenes. We had Rebecca navigating me through the streets of Charlotte and a really awkward parking garage that's out there, which I'm from New York and I've never seen a parking garage like that. So you guys have a unique treasure there that you should play up in your literature. As well as just Skookum themselves for having a great space. This office is really neat. I think Josh did more than a sufficient job talking about what they're doing here, and it's obvious with even having a cool space like this that they're doing great things, and I really appreciate them opening up the space. And then we have Barcamp Charlotte, as well as the CLT blog, which really helped getting the word out there. And without those guys, a lot of you probably wouldn't have heard of this. Of course, I need to thank all of you for coming out, and I really do appreciate it because there wouldn't be an event without you. So the final thanks is that because my family's actually moved to Charlotte in the last couple of years, I have my dad in the back, who actually the book is dedicated to, and my wife, who's sitting there disgruntled because the book's not dedicated to her, although I promised her that maybe one of the next ones, one of the next ones will be. So thank you guys for being here as well. So there's my little spiel, and back to you for now.
Okay, so first I just want to get, I know this, but what's your thesis? I mean, what is this book really all about?
Yeah, so I wrote this book mainly because if you are a person who's trying to keep up with the trends, normally the only way that happens is if you, sorry, a phone call came in. The normally only thing that happens there is that there's these programming books, there's these really deep technical books that don't give you the higher level overview of what's happening on something new and exciting. I think mobile is the most exciting thing. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I think it's one of the most exciting things that are happening out there now. And what I wanted to do is take it up a level from the programming language, from maybe even the design side, and say, how can we think about this strategically? And so what AppSavvy does is it tries to take you through the steps of the whole process from the ideation phase all the way through getting it out into the marketplace, and gives you enough details without overwhelming you. So the big takeaway from AppSavvy is that you can navigate this process without being a programmer like someone like yourself.
Right. Okay. Great. So you talk about the process. So what is this process? Give me a bullet train version.
So the bullet train version would be sort of broken down into 3 different stages. The first stage is that strategy phase. So this includes researching the idea. This includes kind of doing basic market research. This includes kind of understanding, is this going to be a worthwhile endeavor? It includes talking with others out in the marketplace, potentially even talking to customers, believe it or not, even into that early phase, and figuring out if, again, is this something that I should proceed with? That's sort of all part of the strategy phase. The next phase I call the development phase. So this is stage 2 of the 3. And the development phase includes things like actually hiring people. So how do you hire people? Where do you go to hire people? What is this thing going to cost? And then actually doing that development. So then once you have those, that team put together, the designer, the developer, whoever else is involved. Maybe you hire out someone like Skookum, plug for Skookum, hire out someone like Skookum to do that development, kind of going through that process.
Okay.
And then that last phase is the launch phase, which the little secret to the launch phase, which is sort of the marketing and doing the ongoing updates, is that actually really parallels everything else. And we'll probably get into that more, but that really is, even though it's in phase 3, or the state, sort of last, kind of conceptually, it actually practically is something that happens throughout the process.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the first stage. So okay, I've got an idea, right?
Yep.
All right. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience have an idea for an iPhone app, right? So I have an idea in the shower, right, for an iPhone application that's going to revolutionize how we compare and buy paper clips.
Sure.
All right. So
great idea.
Now that I have this idea, what do I do from there? What's the first steps?
There's really the way. Again, I'm a very framework-oriented person. So I'll kind of keep giving you little steps and bullets. But when you're thinking about an idea, and this doesn't give you the full picture where you're going to walk out of the room here and say, now I know if I should go do this idea. But high level, there's 3 areas you want to look at. The first area is actually doing App Store research. So what I'm going to give you is a little bit of a narrative for an app that I built, which proves the ideas that I have, and I have other apps, but I built this app actually after AppSavvy came out. It's called Rise Alarm. Alarm clocks, as you can see, there's tons of them in the App Store, and you'd say, Ken, why in the world do you want to try to build an alarm clock? And I said, I don't think that any of these alarm clocks are good, and I'm going to show people a way to build a better alarm clock. I know that sounds kind of funny, but there you go. The first part of this was actually going into the App Store and downloading just about every alarm clock app there was. You can see just a handful of them on here. But I went in, I paid whatever, $15 or whatever it was to download all of those, use them at night for a period of time, and really tried to learn what were they about, what were they doing, what were sort of the gaps in terms of what they offered. The other nice thing about the App Store, and if you go onto your iOS device, iPad, iPhone, or in the iTunes, you can do keyword searches, right? So you type in, for example, this has the one that I wound up building actually uses local notifications, which is a very technical thing, but basically it means the alarm clock's going to work no matter what. Most of these ones will probably not go off at night because they're using all these different hacks. So you can type in specific things, looking to see, hey, what are the other apps that are having that specific feature, and you can start kind of assessing, what else is out there. You can also read the reviews for all those different apps, so you can see what those customers are saying are the great points of it, what are the bad points of it, and again, kind of start making a little list of those things. So I don't want to go too far into that, but the first thing is the App Store research.
Okay.
The next part is actually the market research, and so one thing that a lot of developers don't do, even people like yourself, is they think about only the software. They don't think about the alternatives that are available offline. Don't get too upset. They don't think about the things that are outside of the App Store, right? They're kind of focused exclusively on those options, and they don't think about the other features. So, one of the things that you'll see as we kind of talk about the story here is the design. The design of alarm clock is something that's happened over decades and decades, and the evolution of it. And I won't go into all the details of the alarm clock research that I did. But there's a lot of interesting things even in terms of the design of them. And so that market research, not just inside the App Store, but outside of the App Store is really important. The last stage of sort of this 3-step evaluation, so evaluating the App Store, evaluating the outside market of the App Store, and then sort of evaluating yourself. Are you a person who has 0 technical capabilities? Are you a person that's built websites? Are you a person who's done desktop software? What are the things that you specifically have experience doing? So there's sort of an aptitude standpoint. And then secondly is, what are your own resources? Do you have cash that you can go spend 15 or 20 grand building something? Do you have friends where maybe you might partner with them? What sort of resources do you have available to you to actually make this happen? So there's sort of a 3-stage high-level evaluation, and those types of things together can start giving you a picture whether this is something I should proceed with. This is something that's going to be a lot bigger than I thought, or maybe it's easier than I thought. But those types of data points help us make informed decisions about moving forward.
Okay, cool. So let's say I've got an idea, I've validated it, and I've gone through this kind of process. Then where do I go from there? So say I might not be a developer.
Yep.
Right. I want to know, like, who do I need to look for to hire? I need to hire a designer. What kind of people am I looking for?
Yep.
What should be my expectations about that?
Let me go one step before that.
Okay.
Okay. One step before that, because I think let me just get a sense in the room. First of all, let's talk about devices. What kind of smartphones do people? How many people have iPhones here tonight? Okay. How many BlackBerry users? And then just feature phones. What do we have? Well, how about Android? Okay.
Don't feature phones.
No. That was not. I actually love Android, and I develop Android apps. So thank you for calling me out on that. That happens almost every time, and I almost expect that reaction. I just like to say iPhone since we're kind of mostly focused on iPhone, but I appreciate you calling me out on that. Like I said. Secondly. See, now you made me lose my train of thought. No, that's fine. So the other thing is designers. Here, I want to talk about skills. Designers in the room, developers. Okay, marketing. Okay, how about like user experience, managers, CEO types? Anyone? Okay. So generally speaking, why I get that sense is because I want to share some tools that people could use if you're not the developer designer type, where you can get started on something without sort of having to go first talk about hiring someone, right? So the other key part of being app savvy is that you develop as much materials before going to talk to developers or designers, anyone that you're going to try to hire, because you want to kind of have a better package to give them so they can give you correct estimates, all of those types of things. So one of the things that I like to show people, and these are really crude, and that's kind of the point, is that you can develop really basic mock-ups with some of the tools out there. And I'll give a plug for one tool called Balsamiq. Balsamiq is a software application that'll work across platforms. So if you're using Mac, if you're using PC, no matter what, you could use that. And it allows you to basically create really basic sort of flows of the application. This, again, is the Rise Alarm, where I took one of the clock faces I found online, I threw it onto one of the mock-ups, and I showed sort of one of the settings screens. All these different templates are part of Balsamiq or other tools that are out there, and you can literally drag and drop them. So before you go talk to the developer, you have something like that and have sort of a much more informed discussion with them to say, not just, oh, I want to design this application, but here's kind of the type of application. You don't even need to have, you don't have to be a designer to kind of create something like that. It's really basic. So kind of before your question is putting all those types of things together and then going in, and it's almost like a blueprint, right? It's sort of an architecture. We sometimes call these wireframes. I like to call them mock-ups because I think people understand it better, but that's sort of the step before going and finding those folks.
So Ken, we have a question from PandaBear6000 on Twitter. And before mock-ups and stuff, they want to know about ideas. Specifically, it says what kinds of ideas are working in the App Store now, and how do you reach the conclusion that you need an app at all?
That's a good question. Kind of a tricky question.
PandaBear 5000?
I thought it was 6,000.
6,000.
Come on. All right. So going back in terms of the sort of ideation phase, number one, we're talking about roughly 400,000 plus apps on the iOS App Store.
And may I interject that almost 1,000 get submitted to the App Store every day.
Yep. So we're talking about super large number, 10 billion downloads, lots of different crazy numbers out there. So it's a very fair question to say, why should we even get started, or sort of what ideas are working? If you want to talk about the most successful apps, meaning the largest number of downloads, it's entertainment based. So these are games. You've heard of the mega successes of Angry Birds or Doodle Jump and all these other ones. And it's almost like, in some ways, and I hope that Apple does this at some point, that they break all those out of the App Store, because it really should just be in sort of a game-oriented or sort of really entertainment-focused area where, you know, all the other apps are fairly different. Obviously, my alarm clock app is not as fun as Angry Birds, if you've ever played Angry Birds. So yeah, exactly. So, you know, game apps are really, really successful. Utilities and productivity, which again is why I built an alarm clock app, is, you know, really, really successful. There's a large market for that, because you have to think about, for most apps, roughly within 20 to 30 days, people stop using them. So they'll open them for the first 20 or 30 days, kind of use them, and and you can see this if you have analytics in your apps, which we'll talk about hopefully. You know, the usage sort of trails off over a period of time. If you can find an application that someone's going to use constantly, you know, and it doesn't have to be something like an alarm clock. It could be, you know, just other types of things that people are using, notes, or, you know, think about all the things you do on a daily basis. That's, you know, that's a category that, or those are categories that you could do very, very well in.
Is it ever okay to build a disposable app?
It is, and especially if you're doing something related to brands, right? So if you are a brand and you have a specific marketing event, like if you have, you know, let's say I'm going to speak at South by Southwest. You know, they put out an app basically every year that's used for, you know, 5 or 6 days and basically becomes, you know, thrown away after that. So there definitely can be apps that get disposed over time. But generally, what you need to find is, it's not really to say what apps are being successful, because lots of different types of apps are successful. It's how do you dial into that? And again, sort of going backwards a little bit, you know, I was talking about that App Store research and the market research. Without going into crazy amount of detail there, I can recommend a great resource that I actually even refer to in my book, because it gives you a framework about competitive stuff, where, you know, obviously I have my own insights into that, but it's called Blue Ocean Strategy. If you really are looking for ways to, not even just in terms of apps to differentiate, you know, apps, but just to differentiate your business, these guys are Harvard business professors, super bright, and I kind of, you know, pull from them a little bit in terms of talking about how do you find that, what they call a blue ocean strategy, or in this case, a blue ocean app that's sort of different than the red waters of competition. So you want to kind of find, and this is why I was saying looking outside the App Store is critical. So it's not just looking sort of vertically, it's looking horizontally to things that are comparable to it. So I think this is going to get too deep, but hopefully I sort of addressed, yeah.
Question, are apps copyrighted? So when you're doing your research and you go and you buy all the apps that are similar to your alarm clock, and then you go and create an alarm clock, can anyone say you copied their idea?
You can. There are, you know, just like anything else, you can copyright, you know, parts of, or patent parts, you know, things that are unique. I would say, you know, even the most successful ones don't really do that.
It's pretty rare.
It is pretty rare, and the reason why, and actually I was on a panel recently where someone talked about this, where someone sort of infringed on their name. It's really hard to do anything about that, you know, even if you have a patent or a trademark or a copyright. In fact, the Doodle Jump guys, which I just mentioned a minute ago, there's like 1,000, you know, sort of spin-offs of Doodle everything, because they're so popular. And they now sort of retroactively are trying to go back and do something. But once it's used sort of in the, you know, I'm going outside of my realms of specific expertise, but once you sort of get into the realms of public usage, you know, you sort of have a little bit of protection if it's been used in commerce. So generally speaking, you know, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, people don't do anything related to that. And you can't copyright an alarm clock, obviously. You might have a patent for this alarm clock functions this way to recognize that you wake up at, you know, 7 a.m. every day, and comes up with the specific formula to make sure that you're always going to get up on time. You know, if you had sort of something in the background, but generally speaking, I don't recommend spending any money on that. And maybe you have thoughts on it.
Well, sometimes the community takes care of it. Like, if someone comes out with an app that looks like, just like obviously is a ripoff from your design. You know, there's been cases I've seen on the internet where, you know, it gets out and just, you know, the company that did that app gets all kinds of bad press, and so. And
relate to that, Apple actually does have, if you've kind of tried to do something where someone's taken your name or taken your graphics, because there are ways to decompile apps, there is a way to get in touch with Apple and say, I try to get in touch with them, they're not pulling it down off the App Store. can you do something? And there have been instances where Apple will pull them off. And I'm talking about Apple because there's more control regulation, but similar types of things can happen in other app stores.
Is there ever a case where you can see someone has a successful app, but say as a company, instead of going through and making something very similar, you could buy the rights for that app?
You can, actually, you can go and buy apps. It's a little bit tricky because apps are assigned to developer accounts. Yeah. But there have been instances, in fact, there's one developer I know who sort of tries to, as best as possible, lay out how to do that. And so there's ways to sort of go and secure the rights to the code and transition the developer account over so that you can take over that. But you can do something like that. It's similar, this isn't different than other software in a lot of ways, besides sort of it being assigned to someone's account, which is sort of an Apple specification.
Yeah, you can look up on Google like where to. That's at least one case I know of that happened. That app, where to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Let's talk about expectations.
Yep.
So we're thinking about hiring a developer or whatever. What can we expect? I mean, in terms of, I'm sure a lot of y'all want to know like numbers, like what kind of things.
What can you make from it, or or how much is it going to cost?
Okay, both. Let's talk about both.
Okay, so both of these are really tricky to answer, but let me start with the one that is about what you can make first. Okay. Okay. So unfortunately, the data that we have on this type of situation is skewed in the sense that you only hear about the major successes and the major failures. So someone says, oh, we got $3 million investment. We actually spent it on this app, and we made $0 from it, or we made a couple downloads a day. On the other side, like we said, we have the Angry Birds, and we have the Doodle Jump. We have these entertainment ones, which honestly are just not even attainable for the average person. I mean, even if you spent a year building something, you're likely not going to have a success like Angry Birds. Right. So then we have to think about what's in between. So some of the research that I did as part of the book was sort of going through different analysts, going through some of my own data, and sort of trying to come up with something that made sense based on sort of reverse engineering, since Apple doesn't give us actual data on this. So this is something that scares some people, but know that they're sort of in between. So the median number that an app makes per year, so this is median, this is an average. So there's sort of, one side on, there's sort of a forward point and there's a backwards point. It's $700 per year per app. And when we talk about cost in a second, that makes people really excited. But you have to think about the fact that there's a lot of in between $700 per year and $5 million a year. Right. Anecdotally, I can say both from my own successes, from what other people in the community share, it's not uncommon to see thousands of downloads and tens of thousands of downloads for a paid app, and even for apps that are free, considerably higher than that. So hundreds of thousands of downloads for those free apps, where then we can start getting into talking about in-app conversions and all of sort of that, excuse me, that side of things. So we're talking about $700 per year per app. We're talking about the extreme cases, not really something that I would recommend to think about as possible. Maybe tens of thousands or thousands of downloads on the paid side, and depending on sort of what's on free, it's pretty reasonable to think hundreds of thousands of downloads for those free apps.
Yes, that looks. My phone died, so I can't. That number, is that number based on free apps as well, or only on apps which have a price? Because that affects sort of.
Yeah, it is based. I'm pretty sure, and I go back and look, but I'm pretty sure it's based on just the paid applications.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So in any case, it's a good question, and unfortunately, it's one of those cases where this is definitely reverse engineered. So this is like Apple says, this is the number of downloads. This is how much we've paid developer, $1 billion. These are the numbers of apps on the App Store, and you sort of, it's like back when you're in, science trying to get the right, result, and you sort of fudge numbers to try to come up with something. But, it's based on sort of that stuff that's been shared by Apple.
Yeah.
So should we say on the flip side now in terms of cost?
Well, let me just add one thing, just anecdotally, in case you are interested. Like my app, it got featured by Apple for 2 weeks. So I guess you could say that's a success. But you know, it still didn't make $1 million. You know, it's like probably enough. I mean, it was enough for me to buy a car, but you know, that kind of range. So
that's pretty good. I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna.
A used car.
Man, I really hate that this app just only got me a car. It's horrible. But no, that's. I mean, it's great. Used or not, I mean, you can see Jeremy. You know, that's why Jeremy got interviewed in the book. He actually has some really interesting, unique ways of marketing, which we can talk about, because I definitely pull some of those nuggets into the book. We have some tricky ways, this guy over here, as to get attention from Apple in particular. But on the flip side of things, the costs are really, really all over the place. But let me go with data that I got from the book, which it comes from a directory where developers basically self-report how much they charge for applications. So this isn't just Ken guessing, and I can happy to share about what I charge or what sort of my team charges for doing things. But generally speaking, you got to think about 10 to 15,000 as being sort of a baseline. And that, can you get it done for a lot less than that? Sure. And that kind of goes back to, do you have the experience in running software development teams? Are you willing to work with offshore resources? Can you find someone who's willing to do it for equity? There's all those types of things. But just to give you a sort of a broader picture, it can cost a couple thousand, but there are apps that cost over 100,000. In fact, sometimes when I'm bidding on different projects, there are guys who are bidding, 150,000 or 200,000 to go build applications, and some of these are for bigger brands. But you have to understand that that's the kind of range that we're dealing with. If you think 10 to 15, let me give you a couple of numbers that give you some context. So let's think about an app taking about 6 weeks to build. And you feel free to chime in on this. I like to say you have to have a full-time developer, a minimum full-time developer, 40 hours a week, and then a part-time designer, 20 hours a week. So we're talking about roughly, and this is like a basic app. This isn't like super complex app. This is kind of a standard app. We're talking about roughly 360 hours of development. You're not going to find a lot of developers who are worth their salt and so this is a blended rate maybe of like $100 an hour. Okay, so you can go and find some developers maybe for $70 or $60 an hour, and if you go again overseas, there are some cases where you can get something cheaper. Again, you're working with a whole lot of other challenges there. But let's say $100. Do the math, and you're talking about somewhere in between $30,000 and $40,000 to do an app. That's not unreasonable, and I'd say again for a lot of companies, that's what they're spending to get a decent app built. That's not the app for maybe sort of the moonlighter who's oh, I have a full-time job and I want to try to get an app onto the App Store. They probably don't want to spend $40,000. They possibly can go find some friends, or maybe they have an equity deal. There's whole other problems when you go down that road with partnerships, and generally I don't recommend doing that. So I generally say, if you can even put any money into it, put some money into it, if you can kind of scrounge that together, then I think you can get a decent app done in $10,000 to $15,000. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
That sounds pretty accurate to me.
I got a question from Twitter. Someone asked, "Will Jeremy buy me a car?" Sure.
I've actually got some at home. They're kind of small, but yeah.
And CLT Nightlife says, at this point, is a disposable or local-oriented app a waste compared to a global use app? So I think what they're saying is it's only intended maybe for a small market as opposed to everyone in general.
I think it really depends on the goals. I actually would be more hot on something that's niche and focused on a specific group of people because it's very targeted, right? It's very targeted to say, I know who I'm trying to reach out to. The upside may not be the same, but if you're looking to, let's say it was, again, an app that's about awareness, community building, it has a long life to it, and there's definitely a lot of value there. If you're looking to make money alone, I'm not sure that's great, but if you're looking for something on the free side, I think the local, something specific to a community is really valuable over just sort of the broader things that are available out there.
When you go local like that, you see, when you said that the user has like a 20 to 30 day shelf life of using the app before they stop using it, on a local, more niche market, do you see
see a longer shelf life for use?
Yeah, so again, I don't have specific market data, but anecdotally I can say, from what I talk, from my conversations, from the things that I read, from, my own investigation, there is a longer shelf life when it's something that's really focused on a community or focused on a local area, sort of regional things versus the bigger, the bigger types of apps. So that's what I'm seeing, and I'm not saying that that's 100%, but that's at least a data point for you.
Right, like for the niche versus a larger market, it really depends what your goals are, because if you are trying to make money, apps tend to be pretty cheap. So unless your niche is really willing to pay a lot for your app, you've got to consider
And well, I think that's actually an important point, because when it is something dialed in like that and something, wow, I really have to have that because it's it's based on knowing every single food truck. I don't know if you guys have big food trucks here, but in other cities around the country, food trucks are becoming crazy. And if I had a listing of every single food truck and I know their schedules every single day, then maybe I'll pay $15 for that app instead of paying 99 cents for it. So again, you can kind of think about that as if it's a really targeted application, you might be able to charge more versus others.
I mean, some people charge like over $100 for a very niche niche app. Did the gentleman over here have a question?
Yeah, these are like, what's your background? How did you get into this? What's your experience? How do I know you're an expert on this?
Well, do you want me to give you my full resume, or I'm happy to send it to you? I have a computer science degree from Boston College. I have a engineering degree and business degree from Wharton, University of Pennsylvania. I was in U.S. News and World Report, #1 top student for up and coming. I was, I went through all of my corporate environment for 5 or 6 years and said, see you later, I'm going to go do my own business. I've been doing mobile stuff for the last 4 or 5 years. I got an awesome book that's a #1 bestseller. I've done PBS for iPad, which is a video player. I did Network Solutions app. I'm working for Tony Robbins. Do you want me to keep going, or does that give you a good enough? Okay. Sure. Well, you can go to my website, kenyarmosh.com, and look it up if you want.
What's the definition of an app?
I think an app is
an application.
Yeah, I mean, app is short for application, but across the board, apps have become sort of a short term for mobile applications. You can have a web application like Gmail. You can have a desktop application such as Word. In general, though, at this point, it's sort of become popularized with the smartphone. I generally refer to it as a small piece of software that runs on your smartphone or your mobile device that gives you specific functionality, typically tailored back from what you'd get in a browser or on the desktop.
All right. So how about let's move on to the app itself. Okay. So there's tons of apps. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of apps. So how do I make my app stand out amidst the sea of apps?
Sure. So a couple different things here. #1 is talking about usability, right? So why did I, again, build an alarm clock app? One of the things that I wanted to do was show people that you could actually build an app that was completely done with gestures. So unlike a lot of other applications that are out there, you actually can get to the different parts of the screen just by swiping around on it. Well, one of the cool things that I liked about this was that you can actually swipe up. It's late at night, you're sort of tired, you don't want the screen as bright, swipe up quickly, lower the brightness. So again, sort of discovering the application versus saying, here's where the settings are, here's where the alarms are, and explicitly defining that and kind of 10 different levels of digging into that. You just can swipe left and set a nap time. You can swipe right, and you can set your alarms. So usability is a big part of that, and I think actually one of your applications does a good job of helping people sort of discover that. So when people download this app, the first thing they see is actually this little screen, which kind of gives them an understanding of what's the layout of the lens. The next part of that is the design. So the design is really, really important. In fact, I invested a lot in going back to the design of the alarms. I really wanted to take what was a traditional alarm clock and put it onto the iOS device. In times past, what have people done is kind of build software. and think about this as being an app that sits inside of a smartphone, I really, and you can't see it here because it's not on the device, but I really wanted to focus the entire screen on an actual alarm. So when it sits next to your bed, this entire device, not just an app sitting on the screen, but it's the entire device, is basically your alarm clock. So it's an iPad, it looks like a giant kind of grandfather clock. If it's this, it looks like an actual little alarm clock. So design is sort of that second key to making it really stand out. And again, with there being hundreds of alarm clocks, just as an example, you can differentiate it with the design itself. I know that you've, even with some of your own stuff, you sort of use design as a way to stand out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, do you want to share anything on it? Or? I'm going to turn the tables here.
Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, Apple says, and you really got to pay attention to Apple because Apple's your biggest customer. I mean, like, they're the people who feature apps. So you really want to do what they say. And Apple says that design is like everything. It's like, because their culture is a culture of design. Obviously, you use your products. So, but they say throughout the whole life cycle of your app, from the very beginning, you should be thinking about design. Then even as you're programming it, as you're using it, then you keep adjusting the design until it's perfect. That's what they do. They obsess over the design. And so I mean, I think design is one of the main, well, usability plus design, like you're saying, is really one of the main ways you can stand out. Because there are hundreds of thousands on the App Store, but I would say, man, I don't know what. Most of them are not well designed.
Yeah, I mean, most applications that wind up on the App Store, and this is why we kind of talk about this whole process, if you're a developer, it costs you $0 other than the investment of your time to put an app into the App Store, right? You're sitting at home at night, you come home from work and you're like, okay, I want to build a calculator. I want to build, a Twitter client. I want to build a ebook reader. And it's basically an investment of your time. So it costs you $0, but you don't have the design, you don't have the marketing narrative, you don't have the strategy. You literally just sat down, coded something, put it up there, and it looks like a developer did it. And it's no offense, because some developers have better design skills than others, but the average developer doesn't. They just kind of throw something out there, hoping it's successful.
Yeah. So I would suggest for the developers out there, what I've seen is that the developers who partner with a designer, that's usually a good deal because they can come up with something really great. I like Tapbots as an example of that. Different companies I've seen. One article I'll just throw out there that you can read. I think there's a lot of common design mistakes when you're designing apps. And so I wrote an article for UX Magazine, and you can find it online. It's called 10 Surefire Ways to Screw Up Your iPhone App. And so anyway, you can check that out. It's a little plug.
No, it's definitely good because we can only go into so much, and App Savvy doesn't dive super into the design details, so it's definitely a great resource.
So we got a question here. How do you strike a balance between app price and sales targets? Higher price, does that necessarily mean less sales versus maybe giving it away for free?
If you, generally speaking, that has a direct correlation. So the higher the price, the lower the downloads. But again, this comes back to what type of app you've built, and do you, for example, have an existing offline brand? Lots of questions, but just a couple examples. Navigation apps at first were not allowed on the device. Eventually they were, and we're talking about Navicon and sort of all these really awesome navigation companies. They charge $100 for their apps, and they're some of their highest grossing apps on the App Store because of that. But generally, we see sort of a inverse relationship where higher price, lower downloads. But that doesn't, again, always equal less sales, right? So what you got to do is you have to, based on your research, go out with a price you feel confident with. I don't recommend going out necessarily with the lowest price. Go out with a price you feel comfortable with. And price is one of the key things that you really have to sort of tweak in the App Store. You can change the description of the app. You can add features over time. But it's one of those things where you can change, even on a daily basis, not that I would recommend that, and see what does that sort of equal. If you're a person that does calculus, you can figure out what the exact right price would be. But a lot of developers will sort of put it up and down to see what is that steady state for them.
And some developers have even played with just switching it to free for like a week or something like that and see what happens. A lot of times there are negative things that you don't think about, like people have a lower barrier of entry, so they don't even bother to read the description, they just download it. And a lot of that will be happening anyway, but the higher the price, the lower the chance of that happening. And when they do that, it might not be what they expect, so there's a higher chance that they'll leave a poor review. So
let's start with even a way broader question. Why do this at all? Like what assumptions are we making about people that have smartphones and would download an app in the first place?
I mean, I think number one, if you think about the mobile market, it is the mobile. Okay, so you want to go real broad. Mobile is not just mobile. And if you haven't grabbed onto that concept yet, you're going to grab onto it soon. This is ushering in a revolution that's changing computing. So we're moving from a place of just kind of sitting in front of our computers to this being a primary device, thing that we spend the most amount of time on. And it's also changed the way that we've interacted with computers. So it's now touch-based, right? Where we're on here, we're swiping to go back and forth, or pinching and zooming. So what this is showing us is a picture of the future. This shows us that eventually, in some form or another, our computers that sit in front of us will probably be tappable and swipeable. Every screen that we interact with, whether it's a screen that is a mobile device, a computer, maybe it's a screen on a refrigerator, all of those types of things are going to be more like this than what we currently experience. So if we don't understand that apps are just a precursor for a change in the computing paradigm, then we sort of are behind the curve. So let's get up to that point and then say, even in terms of what it currently is valued to us, we're talking about 60 apps on average customers download. I mean, how many people download apps if you have a smart device? How many people are downloading apps? Raise your hands if you're downloading an app. I mean, how many people are using their smartphone or an iPad or something to do a lot of their email, or let's say 50 or 60% of your email every day? I mean, there's like, already sort of, let's say a quarter, a third, 40% of you may be using this as a primary device. This is where we're going. The stuff that we use now, Microsoft Word and all those sort of desktop software, is stuff that's going to kind of go away. It's not going to say that it won't exist. It'll just exist in a different format. So I think mobile apps are just a small microcosm, and probably a lot bigger microcosm at this point of the place that computers and computing is going.
Yeah, and just a tiny point. This is kind of a micro point, but what I think is very interesting about the App Store in particular is it's not just about apps, but the App Store has made it so that people are actually like having fun just like browsing through apps.
That's a good point.
That's never happened before. You don't just browse through software for your Windows PC or your Mac until now they have an App Store for Mac.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's kind of just
that's actually a really good point, because software has become fun, right? And we see that most, like I said, the most successful are entertainment based. But just in general, it's like, oh yeah, I want to find a new tool that does X, Y, Z. I'm going to spend a little bit of time swiping up and down, checking out different options available, and I'm going to spend $1 on that. And that's sort of changed, even in terms of prices, that's really changed our mindset. And sort of the value that we assign to those.
And even they might not even, I know people who don't look for anything in particular. They just pull out their iPhone when they've got a spare moment and just browse through the apps, through the different categories.
Yep. How do you, when you come up with an app, how do you, I guess, counter any type of negative feedback? Because I've seen some comments where I will download an app and I find it, I won't say supremely useful, but very useful nonetheless. And I read some of these comments, and they're like, I can't believe I wasted 99 cents. I'm like, God, you can't even buy a Coke for 99 cents.
Right.
I mean, how do you, as a developer, get past that? I'm not talking about like from an emotional level or anything like that. I'm talking about,
which is hard.
Of sales, because I mean, obviously, most of these products are probably a work in progress. And how do you get past that and entice people to keep trying your product? I mean, you just factor in the price, or do you consistently update, or? Yeah,
so I think the big question is, how can you deal with that, especially if you're having like a long-term investment? Like you've done this, it's not just you put this out and you're hoping to move on to the next thing, but the big part of that is actually going through this process, a little bit of what we're talking about now, which is thinking about it first, focusing on the usability and the design then doing the development. But I do say as part of that process that if you've gotten to, let's say, the design or the user experience and you say, oh, this app's not worth it, then stop, right? So hopefully by the time you've gotten there, and it's not going to say, you're always going to get someone complaining about something, right? I mean, it might be complaining about someone's age because they look young and they're sitting in front of a room and talking. I'm just kidding. But you're always going to have someone, kind of calling you out. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to just be ready to address that and say, hey, I'm sorry. Here's what we're working on to try to make you happy. And you know what? I respond to every single customer support email myself, and I say, I understand that that's what you want. I can't do that right now. I really hope that that you'll kind of stick around, and maybe I'll get to that at some point, and maybe I'll give you that feature that you want. But it is a commitment to being proactive, even with the negative, and sort of absorbing that negative and saying that's going to make me stronger. Right. That's going to make the app stronger, and it is hard because it's like less than a cup of coffee, and you've invested your blood, sweat, and tears into it. Yeah,
and you can actually turn these people into fans too, even by what you're saying, kind of the quick responses and stuff like that. Another thing is that on the App Store, when you submit an update, it doesn't show the reviews for the last update. It only starts showing reviews again once you have a significant amount of reviews for the current version. And so, you can keep submitting updates to, so you don't get all the bad stuff from the previous versions.
And I just say, I do think that if you're hearing, so there's sort of outliers, and then there's sort of, this is what I'm mainly hearing. If across the board people are saying, this feature needs to be there, then you better make that the #1 feature you're going to work on. Right. If it's one person that says, I really wish that this alarm had my voice recorded so that I can wake up to my voice in the morning, then I'll say, you know what, I'm sorry, this isn't going to be the app for you, and I'm likely not going to do that. So you sort of have to, obviously weigh that a little bit and see, is this an outlier? Is this sort of a core complaint?
You'll be surprised the kind of emails you get. I mean,
yeah, they're just ridiculous.
I've gotten emails also even they're hesitant to buy the app. It's 99 cents, but they're asking all these questions about it. And they're like, okay, it's 99 cents.
So actually another way to curtail, right? So if you're looking for strategies, is just have a lot of information available, both in the description as well as blog. Have sort of a page describing all the features. Have a Twitter account that discusses all these things, and you can hopefully hit the people that need all that information so they don't make the purchase to begin with, and say, do not buy this app if you're looking for X. And hopefully it doesn't come to that point, but.
Be very clear about your promise, and don't overpromise. Even if you haven't had the time to make a feature work really great, don't advertise it that much. I mean, if you just have a feature that is actually just like a link to a website, don't put it on your features list. I mean, because people are like, oh, it's just a website. So those kind of things.
Here's a great question from Twitter. Why would I pay as a company? Why would I spend $15,000 on an app if it's only going to make me $700?
So as part of what you're doing for market research, this is not just app. This is what I'm saying. It's not just mobile stuff, right? There's lots of business folks in the room. You have to evaluate everything you're doing and look at the ROI. So I do give ways of sort of doing market estimation to say, what can I make from this app? It does give you a ceiling, but for example, maybe the ceiling that you get is $100,000. And you say, I believe that I can make my money back from that, and I can sort of break even. But there's also another part here, which is your goal to make money from an application? Or for example, if you're a brand, get people into your store, and they're going to spend the money there, right? If you have sort of a retail situation, or it might even be, is this going to get attention and have people kind of come in and sit with me across the room in the meeting room where I can sell them on something? So it's really hard to just look at that $700 number and say, oh, I'm not going to make that investment, because there could be things outside of that is going to sort of be the payback. But if it was just a pure apples to apples, where it's I want a paid app that's going to make me money, and you do some numbers crunching and you say, you know what, I'm seeing 10 grand. The estimates that I got back from this are 30 grand. Then yeah, don't proceed and don't build that. It's not a good use of your funds. And at the end of the day, the difference of me versus hopefully other sort of technical people is that I would say, don't invest in something because it's cool. invest on something that's going to actually benefit your business, your brand, your organization, whatever it is.
All right, so could we talk about marketing?
We can talk about, I know you want to talk about that.
So you've got, where does marketing start?
Marketing starts at the start.
Okay.
And that is different than a lot of other avenues or sort of web development, desktop software, or maybe anything else, because we're talking about smaller time frames to actually put something into the market. So I said 6 weeks before. Let's just say you have a 8 to 12 week application. If you're working in any medium to large size company, which I've done in the past, it takes a long time to make things actually get moving. And even if you're working in a small to medium sized company, it still takes a long time to get things moving. So you've got to sort of start greasing the skids from the beginning. I like to say that development informs marketing, marketing informs development. And I'll give you a couple of specifics there as to what that means. But if you look at here, this is actually what a lot of us will call sneak peeks. It's basically a preview of an application that wasn't even built yet. So at this point, literally the only thing that existed for this application was some design assets. One of them was the app icon, which are the things that you see both on the iPad as well as your iPhone and your iPod Touch. And what we did, just to kind of assess some interest in this, was put it out on a site that sort of early adopters, so designers, developers hang out on, called Dribbble. It actually has 3 Bs. Us sort of tech geeks have to spell everything wrong and make things complicated just to get the domain that we want. But you can see that there was over 1,000 views for this, and I generated, roughly speaking, 20 or 30 signups for people on a newsletter list, just because we shared this, and we got a decent level of interest just from sharing a design. So this was done, again, before code is even being written, and helps us understand and gauge interest, and sort of, like I said, marketing informs development. So we said, OK, we've got some baseline here. Let's keep pushing forward with the next step in the development process. Right. That also then helps us because we have like I said, there's sort of a newsletter sign up there, but we also have a beta sign up. And these are people that also want to test the application. Right? So not only did they give us their emails for newsletters, but they said, we want you to get back in touch with us so that we can test the application before it goes out into the App Store. So now we're getting people who are not only going to sort of root for our app, they're also going to help us test it, so it's not just a couple of us sitting in a room banging on it. Again, for something like an alarm clock, I want you to put it on your bedside and wake you up in the morning. And got a lot of great feedback from that. So it's a whole process that starts and sort of parallels the development itself.
Could I just say something about the beta testing? This one kind of benefit that I didn't foresee is that these were the guys that went straight to the App Store when it came out. They not only downloaded it, but they wrote a glowing review because they helped inform me. They helped build it. You get people involved in the process, and then they're going to be the fans. They're going to be rooting for you. So.
No, I mean that's essentially you want to build a team. And your team is not just your designer, developer, whoever is building the app, your marketing team, but it's a group of people that include, and as well, because in the beta program you want to get it out to sort of people that are writing blogs and things like that. So I actually have a number of, I'll get to your question in a second. So I have a number of people that are that are press people that also do the testing, right? So this team is kind of internal plus external, and at the end of the day you get a much better product by including the people that actually are going to use the app. So they'll say, hey, you know what? I needed this alarm to have a snooze button, right? Let's say I didn't have the snooze button. They'll say, I need a snooze button. And if I heard that from a lot of my beta testers, and I say, before I submit this to Apple, we got to put the snooze button in there. So that could be a big part also of going back to the question over here was not making it negative when I get out there. It's just making sure I incorporated their feedback before I got into the App Store itself.
But to get the beta stuff out there
for
people, if it's not in the store, like I know that I'm working on an app, my developer has my ID and has to check my thing, but there's only like 3 people that we can give it to. Is there some process through which we're able to get that information to more beta testers than 5?
Yeah.
Yes.
So part of it, and again, it depends on what you've done up to this point. But just going back a couple of slides here. So you may be past this point where you can try to kind of rally people. But even if you put a very basic sign up, so again, this is done with Google Docs. So again, I didn't use any other external help. I sort of put this together. This is a free. Do you guys know WordPress? Anyone know WordPress blogs? It's a free thing, that I know some of you know what it is, but other people don't. So it's a free website or blog, depending on what you need. And a lot of those themes out there are free. Install it, and then what I did is embed a Google Doc, right? Really basic stuff, and I put a sign-up form that said, would you like to sign up for this? Give me your contact information. Give me your UDID. What is, for others that don't know that, don't need to worry what that is. What kind of device do you have? What operating system are you running? And I tweet that out. I send that out to some friends and family, and I basically get as many people that I can get to get into that program to test it. So, yeah, I mean, start with sort of your personal, close contacts, and I'm assuming more people than have iPhones or whatever you're doing than just 5, right? Start with those people and build out and say, hey, could you actually talk to anyone else that you know that may want to test this that has iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad?
Yeah. Yeah.
Please.
Like, how are you getting it to them? Are you emailing it in some sort of?
No. So go to a website called testflightapp.com. It's a really easy way to distribute out the application. It requires that the device has iOS 4, which most devices have at this point, and it is a way to distribute the application over the air. So literally, you don't have to email it, you don't have to do any of that stuff. It makes it simple, right? So that, and I do this with my clients. I don't email them anything. I say go to this URL, they hit something, and it gets installed. Another one that you want to check out if your developer can look at, it's called Hockey. So search for Hockey app or Hockey framework. I'm pretty sure I have the URL in here, but happy to give it to you directly. It's not like hockeyapp.com or anything like that. So it's actually an open source alternative. TestFlight's free right now, I believe, but it gives you a lot more configuration and options to do it yourself. So if your developer wants to go and set that up, you can sort of not deal with the TestFlight framework. Sure.
So if you've done your market research, you've got your idea and you said this is a good idea, you've got the money and you hired a designer to get on with your app, what are sort of the buzzwords that you need to know as you're vetting talent, let's say programming talent?
Yep.
What are the kinds of things you need to hear them say as they talk about the different methods?
Good question, because everyone right now says I develop apps. Literally, like web people, desktop people, everyone says I do apps because it's so lucrative. We talked about the numbers, $100 an hour, definitely you could push that up, $175, $200 an hour, everyone says I do apps. So the place that I like to start at with developers in particular is to say, show me the apps that you've developed, right? So hopefully they've developed apps. I wouldn't take a chance on someone. So I'd say, point me to your apps that you've put in the App Store. Hopefully it's under their account. You can verify that's their name. Because there are some cases where someone says, I developed this app but never did. Say, show me these apps, download them, start to get a feel for them. Are they buggy? Are they interesting? Do they make sense? Do they work? That's a baseline. If they sort of pass that check, then find apps that you think your app is similar to, and then say, here are 4 apps that I think are sort of like an app that I'm interested in building. I'd like to walk through each of these apps with you. Tell me what you think this app would cost to build. Tell me what you think the main challenges of this app look like, and sort of go through similar types of questions like that. If you sort of get through all those, then you might say, maybe you have some sort of confidentiality agreement, something like that. You say, here are my mock-ups for the apps that I've put together. I'd like you to give me an estimate on that. And you can sort of put a payment schedule in place based on milestones. They complete this version. The next version, you submit it to the App Store. Payments get based on those types of things. But it is a process by which it's different than a lot of other things because you can really play with it and really experience it versus someone just talking about it. So that's kind of the key part of vetting developers, in particular designers. It's a little easier to sort of visually inspect what they've done, but developers sort of play with what they have done and then ask them questions based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some of the frameworks that could get a novice developer up and running? Let's say if you have in-house talent, and this might not be a mission-critical app, but it'd be something great for your team to have.
So I'm not following what your specific.
Oh, yeah, like
so I'm actually happy to talk about those. However, I have a pretty biased opinion based on work that I've done. So just to give context for everyone, what's being talked about here is there are some third-party toolkits that help developers, and some of them are cross-platform oriented, meaning that it can run on Android, Apple, and other similar types of mobile devices. Then there are other ones that are more specifically geared towards, let's say, iPhone or something else of that nature. My general take on those types of opportunities is that they're not great in terms of ramping people up to speed. You really want to get people ramped up to speed on native development, meaning that sort of Objective-C if you're dealing with this, Java if you're dealing with Android, and so on and so forth. If you are really concerned about, let's say, cross-platform, which I know is not your question, but we can go back to that in a second, cross-platform, then build a web app. Don't build an app for the iPhone, Android, that's native. Build something that's web-based. To get people ramped up to speed, my general recommendation is, take someone who's new, bring them on, and I do this often with my guys, bring them on to an existing project or an existing app and give them a task, or give them a small piece of an app to build. So if we have a bug in one of our apps or we have a small feature update, I'll take in a new developer and I'll say, I want you to work on this. If you have questions, ask this guy who's sort of the lead developer on it. So that is the best way to sort of get new people up to speed, because then you have sort of a coach, you have something that's already existing, they don't have to create things from scratch. If you're looking for alternatives like PhoneCap or Appcelerator and sort of all these other ones, then I generally would skew away from those and focus on just building pure mobile web app, which just lives in the browser.
Right.
Do you have something to add to that?
I know lots of people have different opinions on things like PhoneGap, and basically, well, what PhoneGap does is it essentially makes it so that developers who know web development can get in really easily,
right? Because
you're basically building a web app within a native app. And they basically give you a lot of tools to make it look like a native app and things like that. So there's pluses and negatives. It's a lot faster for web developers to pick something like that up. That's probably one of the main positives. I'm actually probably going to write an article about this sometime. But one of the negatives that I've seen in apps that use things like PhoneGap is that they don't quite feel right. They don't quite feel like a native app, as in like it's not quite easy to do things like transitions smoothly, and also another thing is that Apple forces you to keep to certain conventions when you're building a native app. You can get around them, but it's hard. So like design conventions. So like the way the navigation bar is and the buttons look. You can get around them, but it's easy just to stick with their conventions. And so most apps look like that. With PhoneGap, you don't have that, and so a lot of PhoneGap apps look a lot different, or they look like web apps, not iPhone apps. And so there's, anyway, those are some things.
Yeah, I mean, I can't name names for clients, but we've definitely taken on projects where they used a third-party framework, and I wouldn't even say which one it was, and we basically had to rebuild their whole app because the performance is really horrible. Mm-hmm. Again, when you're using something that's based on the web model, which is every time you have to pull information, you have to kind of call and refresh the page, and it really could become a drain on the experience for the customer.
Yeah.
So I think you hit on those points, but just to more specifically.
Yeah. I mean, if you can make it look and feel exactly like a native app, I'm fine with that.
Right.
If you can't get to that point, then I would be careful.
So I want to go to a Q&A session now.
Sure.
Whether it's really broad, like you're still not getting why to do this at all, or if you're developing, you have a very specific question for these guys. Go ahead and take your hand up.
So I tend to be kind of a cynical guy. If there was a gold rush, I'd be the guy setting up a new store to sell instead of digging for gold. So So, for example, a company I heard about recently called Playtonic, they're a good example. They basically provide a service that people can embed in their apps for like in-game statistics,
Right.
like leaderboards and scoreboards and stuff like that. What's your opinion of that ecosystem, and like how many opportunities are still left for things like that,
Right.
where you're not necessarily making money off of each app purchase, but all the people that write these apps rely on you and possibly pay you a residual amount?
So I can tell you that I talked to a lot of venture capitalists, and they were always trying to look, how can I make money in investing into mobile, and that's the first place they'd look is infrastructure. That being said, there's some problems and there's still some risk to go with that, even though the pie is bigger, which is namely that you're dealing, at least on the Apple side, which is where most dollars are right now for apps, not dollars for advertising and other things, that you're sort of at the mercy of Apple's regulations, right? So in particular, and thankfully Apple's backed off of this, but when it came to analytics and it came to some of these other types of infrastructure providers, Steve Jobs was sitting on stage one day during the All Things D conference and called out a specific company by name Flurry, analytics provider, and said, we don't like what they're doing and they can't do that anymore. And thankfully sort of pulled back on that and didn't follow through on implementing that specifically, but you're at the mercy of a regulated environment and you have to decide, is it worth investing millions of dollars, which is what it costs to build an infrastructure play. That's sort of the question that you have to answer.
They kind of leaked the iPad, but
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. And why was Steve Jobs upset was because they could see in their analytics the new devices that Apple was building, and they said, hey, by the way, here's the iPad's coming out, or by the way, the iPhone 4 is coming out, because they could see the identifiers in the analytics. So, but your thinking is good in the sense of that there's definitely other ways to make money than just sort of selling the apps themselves. There's infrastructure. Like I said, there's people that are willing to get paid to do it. There's a variety of sort of ways outside of specifically doing it yourself. And at the end of the day, though, I still think that it's probably less risky and generally a better opportunity just to try to get into it than it would be to do any of those other ones, because you have to get money from somewhere to do something like that. Whereas there's sort of a less, sort of a lower threshold to go build the app itself.
Jeremy, I know your app, grades for students and whatever. If you hadn't been able to program that yourself and design that yourself and do all that, I mean,
would I have done it?
It seems like it would have been a huge investment for a little return. I mean, so most of those that are kind of, do you see any business that maybe would have supported you in that?
If I didn't know.
Well, actually, let me ask you this: how many hours did you spend? Do you want to talk about that? Because that maybe actually gets to the.
Oh man, well, unfortunately, I didn't keep track of my time, but. Including marketing, because I spent probably 30% of my time on marketing. But
sure.
Man, maybe, I don't know, maybe 300, 350 hours over the course of a year, something like that, just in my spare time.
Yeah.
But it took me a year overall to build it. I was going to school and working and everything.
And that's your first app too. So sort of the. Yeah. So I want to answer your question for you, but if you think about those hours relative to your question, I think you get your answer.
Yeah, so that involved also, learning how to build them, and also learning a lot about marketing and design, which I spent a lot of my time on. But yeah.
Hey, can you talk about how you got your app noticed by Apple?
Well, let's see. I think a lot of it has to do with traction at the beginning. I think the launch is really important. Because I have a feeling how Apple finds the apps that they feature is they see the apps that are gaining a lot of traction at the time. I'm not sure that this is how it works, but I made basically my idea is that you have to make a splash for Apple to make a bigger splash for you. And so for me, when my app came out, because of all the pre-launch marketing that I did, there was people on Twitter, all kinds of people on Twitter posted about it. People on different blogs posted reviews about it. And then it's possible that also some Apple employees were following my blog too.
Yeah, Jeremy also did something really interesting, which is that somehow he found Apple employees on Twitter and created a list and followed them. So he didn't say that, but he basically had and I think it actually exists to this day, right?
Yeah.
He has a list of Apple
see it on my Twitter
employees that I'm pretty sure you knew that worked in the App Store side of the house, or?
It was pretty much just employees, because I think that it's not just like an App Store specific. I think a lot of the employees have a say as to what gets featured.
Yeah. So anyways, that's a little part that he didn't specifically say, but I actually think that made a big difference because, and then he sort of wrote about that, and it's like, hey, I created this list of Apple employees. Go follow this list, and I think that actually has that made a difference. Not saying that everyone that does that, but everything else in light of that, and that's sort of a unique thing at that time. So there's a question back there.
On your point of making a splash, so I mean, is there like a tipping point? I mean, is there a point in which like 1,000 downloads and all of a sudden it's the tipping point where it goes viral?
For me, the tipping point was, just a few hundred. It got on the top education chart. That's the category of my app. I think it got into maybe it was like number 70 or something like that. So a few hundred downloads got me into like 70, number 70 in the education category. And then
so this is actually a key idea, which is charting, right? So it's just like selling this book. Right? If you sell, the way this works on Amazon is you're selling the book and it starts moving up the rankings. And as you move up in the rankings, you start showing up on the top 100 list, right? And you might just, if someone, enough people see that, it potentially shows up in the top 50, and then it shows up in the top 25, and then it's in the top 10. Every time you move up into that different sort of ranking, you all of a sudden get a lot more visibility for it. So with Jeremy's app, he got picked up on a number of blogs that kind of gave him a boost in the rankings. And all of a sudden, he slowly started creeping up, and then he started charting higher and higher. This is just like any other kind of hits-driven business, where the more people that are buying it, the higher you go, the more visibility. And it's almost like it's a cycle where you get into that place, and it sort of helps maintain it a little bit.
And one big insight that's really important to know about the App Store and marketing is that the ranking algorithm that they use is a window of just a few days. It only keeps track of the last few days. And so it's heavily weighted toward the current day, the current day's sales, and then a little less on the second day, or the yesterday's sales, and then a little less on the third. Does it go to 4 days? I don't know. Something like that, like a 4-day window, say. So when you're talking about marketing, when you really want to do a heavily concentrated marketing push, usually during the launch. That's the best time, because after that one push, you've got that boost into the charts. But then after 4 days, all that traction's gone. It's not keeping track of that
so you want to
anymore.
get as much upfront as possible, get as high as possible, and then you sort of are hoping to use that traction to stay up there.
You don't want just fragmented marketing.
Sorry, I don't think your question's answered, or maybe you have a follow-on, but.
Yeah, that was a great answer, actually.
Okay, great. Well, then forget you. Next time.
What happens if you have, like I was mentioning the local apps earlier, what happens if you've got an app that, you're not looking for just the quick in and out dollar of the 20 and 30-day shelf life, but if you're really wanting to keep this app going, how do you, after your initial splash, like you said, how do you reinvigorate? How do you create the second splash?
It's in some ways you have to keep repeating the cycle, and that's what makes it hard. But in the same way that you invested all that time thinking about what were the features, what goes into this, what design, you have to do that same process as you build updates, right? So you can't just put it out there and say, okay, I'm done, I'm going to retire now, and this will just kind of get me my little island. You have to basically start over and listening to your customers that are emailing you, looking at the App Store reviews, taking those things, building your feature list, updating the app, and then kind of getting the same marketing push. If the biggest way, though, to make it successful is to build a great app. So the better, the quicker you're iterating, the faster you're getting those updates out into the App Store, you're going to start attracting more and more attention to saying, hey, this is the definitive one that we need for XYZ thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Is a big launch as important if you have, let's say, geographically local specific and you already have a built-in audience? Meaning you're not relying on people just coming to iTunes, finding your stuff.
Right.
You already know who your audience is. Is a big launch as important?
I mean, again, it really depends on what your, I don't like to keep saying it depends on what your goals are, but it really depends on, when you say long term, is that 6 months? Is that a year? Are you trying to, build something that's kind of going over over a longer period of time, or is it still, sort of a specific time period where it's relevant to an event? Generally, you want to try to get as much traction as possible when you go out. So the big launch would be the generic answer. And the other reason why is that even though it's not as important now because so many apps get into the App Store, you also show up in what's called the new releases section. And so you only get the new releases one time. One time. And so you want to sort of take advantage of that new release showing you pretty high there, as well as sort of all the other traction to get as high as possible, because people aren't going to have to go look for you on the new release. It just shows up, as one of the, let's say, the top, 10 apps that launched today.
There's been a lot of talk this evening about paying a company to develop your app for you. I want to go the other way, which is basically I've got some ideas cooking that I only, as conceited as it sounds, only I feel that I can actually make happen. My question is, though, not knowing anything about programming, in your opinion, what would be the best course for those of us that have no programming experience but have the desire to succeed and also the willingness to work at an app and flesh it out and constantly update it?
Right.
Would you recommend a class, books?
So you're saying you want to learn programming yourself?
Yes, in order to do the apps.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of great resources, but Apple provides a ton of them. Both through, so register for the development program. I don't know if you've done that. Go through those tutorials. Apple also has the last WWDC. They released all of that content, programming, and some of them are a little more advanced, but they released all of it for free. Go through all of those. There's also the Stanford iPhone programming. Have you done that one yet? Okay, so if you've done those, you've kind of gone through them, absorbed them. The very best way to do it is to start programming, right? And that sounds like an easy answer, but it sounds like you've sort of done your homework. So the next step is really just start doing something, even if it's a basic app. Come up with a goal and say, I want to build this app. Maybe I don't release it. I use it for myself, but kind of get immersed into that. Yeah. And I'd say keep realistic timelines. Set something on. Say, oh, I'm going to do this by the end of the month. Otherwise, it's like, oh yeah, I want to build this app, and if you don't put it as a real project, just like you would at work, then the likelihood of you completing that is probably low.
So let's do one more question, and we'll let you guys get to drinking or eating cupcakes or going home.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about process, and there's beta and stuff. I have some friends who do a lot of web development, and the saying is, if you're not embarrassed by your first product, you've waited too long.
I think it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's not that you've said it, it's that I think the people that say that, it's really dumb. Because here's what they're trying to say, okay? They're trying to say that, first of all, some random, not random, actually a smart person said that, but I just completely disagree with them. I think it's dumb, and here's why. Number one, the App Store in particular is different than the web. So the web is this place where you can constantly push anything out and it gets changed. It doesn't really have this history that follows it around, which are customer reviews. In general, though, I mean, how many of you are willing to give something a second try when you've tried it the first time and you think it sucks? And I don't like to use that word lightly, but I mean seriously, like raise your hands. I want to use something a second time if I tried it one time. No, I don't think so. So the idea is generally, if you're embarrassed by it, then it's probably not very good. And I think we're all busy people. I'm not going to try something a second time or a third time. So I'd say that the spirit of that idea is great, meaning that don't spend 5 years building something. But if you're spending 2 days and you throw it up there, we don't live in Silicon Valley here. I'm sort of an East Coast guy. It's a very different world where they think, you know, they're all in coffee shops all day, like playing games. Oh, well, I'm going to build something cool today. And, you know, and they think, oh, I'm embarrassed by this. Look, it's great. Oh, it's Facebook. Awesome. You know, at the end of the day. So, you know, that doesn't happen usually. So.
Yeah. And especially like with apps. And the reason I took a year, because I could have released my app after maybe 5 months, right? But I took a year because I wanted to try to get it right the first time. And for whatever reason, it worked. So, but with like we've been talking about with this launch thing, I mean, with web apps, you've kind of got more time, and you know you can iterate on it more. But with an app, it's really hard to get a second chance, you know, with buzz. And so, I mean, you could try it for another app, but
so again, the takeaway there is you should think about in the sense of I shouldn't be spending an absurd long time. Like I would say, if you spent more than 3 or 4 months on the app, stop, you know, and figure out what's happened, why you've spent that amount of time, and take a step back. Unless you're developing a game, if you're developing a game, it could be 4 or 6 months. But if you're developing just some other app, then kind of reassess and don't embarrass yourself, but definitely realize that you've got to sort of ship it, basically.
Right.
Ship it into the store.
Well, thanks for all the questions, you guys. Stick around. Find a developer, ask him more questions. Find one of us from Skookum, talk to Ken. He's definitely got some books to sell if you guys have not read it yet. But we thank you for your guys' time. That was great.
Thank you, guys. Good job. Work, sir?